Living Stories presents a cinematic tale of mystery, memory, and quiet voices that never fade. The house that whispers. Subscribe to Living Stories for more stories that breathe, remember, and haunt.
The sea was unusually calm that morning, as if it had grown tired of its own restlessness. The Eliza, a British merchant ship built in the late 19th century, moved quietly through the Irish Sea, her sails full but her sound minimal. No creaks, no rattles, only the deep, steady exhale of the wind pressing through her canvas wings. Captain William Holt stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the line where the sky dissolved into the water. It was mid-April of 1903, and the ocean was a mirror. For the crew of 17 men, it had been an easy voyage so far. They were carrying barrels of coal and textiles from Bristol to Reykjavik, a routine journey they'd made many times before. There were no storms in sight, no dark omens in the clouds, just an endless blue stretched across the horizon. Yet in the stillness, something felt slightly off, so subtle that no one spoke of it aloud. Boatswain Thomas Brigg was the first to notice it. While checking the rigging, he glanced down into the water and froze. The reflection of the Eliza trembled on the glassy surface, but not because of waves. The water was perfectly still, yet the image of the ship rippled faintly, as though the sea beneath was breathing. He leaned over, squinting. For a brief second, he thought he saw movement, as if something massive and slow was gliding just below the hull. Then just as quickly it was gone. That night, during dinner, the men spoke quietly over clinking tin cups. The cook, Anders, ladled thick stew into bowls as the ship rocked gently. A kerosene lamp swung above them, casting long shadows over the wooden table. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Brigg muttered. "The water's strange today." The captain, who rarely joined in such talk, lifted his eyes. "The water's fine. Don't let your mind wander, Mr. Brigg. Calm seas make men imagine ghosts." But as he said it, Holt's tone carried an edge, like a man trying to convince himself. Later, when most of the crew had gone to rest, the captain stayed on deck. The sea spread in all directions, empty and silent. The sky was thick with low clouds, and the moon's pale glow made the fog shimmer faintly. Holt pulled out his logbook and wrote slowly, his handwriting neat but strained. April 12, 1903. The weather steady. Wind east-northeast. No changes. The calm, almost unnaturally so. Crew reports faint disturbances in reflection of ship, possibly due to pressure shifts or fatigue. But I, too, feel an odd presence in the air. There is a weight in the silence, as though we are being watched. He closed the book and placed it in the drawer of his cabin desk. Before blowing out the lamp, he noticed a faint humming, a vibration that seemed to come from the hull itself, low and deep, like a pulse. He pressed his palm to the wood. The sound stopped. By the third day, a thin mist began to follow them. It wasn't thick enough to block sight, but it clung to the sails, to the ropes, to the men's skin. The ship's bell seemed to ring duller, as if the fog swallowed sound. At dawn, First Mate John Mercer spotted something unusual on the horizon, a flicker, a quick glint of light, like a lantern being waved once and extinguished. It appeared again a few hours later, this time closer. Through his spyglass, Mercer saw what looked like a distant ship, motionless, half hidden in haze. But the silhouette was wrong. The mast seemed bent, curved unnaturally, as if warped by heat. When the captain joined him, the image had already vanished. "Sunlight through the fog," Holt said, though his voice carried no conviction. "Optical illusion." "An illusion doesn't reflect lantern light," Mercer replied softly. That evening, the weather log recorded a curious note. "Observed flickering light west by northwest. Possible distress signal, but no visible ship. Attempted to signal back. No response." The men began to whisper of strange sounds below deck. Anders swore he heard footsteps pacing in the cargo hold when everyone was topside. Another sailor, young Patrick, said he woke to the sound of someone whispering his name, only to find the bunks around him empty. "Dreams," Holt told them. "The fog plays tricks on the ears." But the next night he too woke suddenly to a soft knock on his cabin door. When he opened it, there was no one there. The corridor was silent, dimly lit by the flicker of an oil lamp. By the 6th day, tension aboard the Eliza grew heavy. Conversations died quickly, laughter disappeared. Meals were eaten in silence. The men began glancing over their shoulders without realizing it. Even the gulls had vanished. The skies were empty. That afternoon, Mercer reported a drop in the barometer. No wind, no storm, just pressure falling fast. Holt ordered all hands to prepare for a possible squall. Yet the sky remained perfectly clear. The ocean looked almost metallic, flat as glass. Then something began to rise. Briggs saw it first. A faint circular distortion in the water ahead. The surface shimmered like heat over sand, and from its center came a column of faint white light that flickered in and out, soundless but alive. "Captain!" he shouted. "There's something in the water!" Men gathered at the rail staring. The light pulsed once, twice, then faded. When it was gone, the sea closed over it, leaving only ripples. Silence fell again. A strange electric taste filled the air, like the aftermath of a storm that never came. The compass needle spun twice before settling. Holt's hand trembled as he wrote in the logbook, April 14th, 1740 hours. Unidentified luminescent phenomenon observed. Duration approximately 20 seconds. No sound, crew visibly distressed. I'm unable to explain. That night no one slept. The fog had thickened into something living. It pressed against the portholes, moved with a rhythm. The ship seemed to slow down, though the wind hadn't changed. Every creak, every whisper of rope sounded louder than it should. Around midnight, Mercer entered the captain's cabin. "There's movement in the water again," he said quietly. "Like shadows under the ship." "Whales?" "No, too still, too deliberate." They went on deck together. The lantern light barely reached the water. Then beneath the surface, they saw it. Pale shapes drifting upward, faintly glowing, like ribbons of light twisting through the deep. They hovered for a moment, then scattered into darkness. "It's phosphorescence," Holt murmured. "Plankton!" Mercer looked at him. "Plankton doesn't move against the current." For the first time, the captain couldn't find words. By dawn, the light was gone. The sea looked calm again, though the fog remained. But something aboard had shifted. The men moved slower, their eyes hollow. A few refused to go below deck at all. Patrick, the youngest sailor, refused to eat and whispered constantly about hearing his mother's voice calling from the water. At noon, the ship's dog, a small terrier named Finn, began barking wildly at the bow. He wouldn't stop. The men tried to calm him, but he kept growling, staring fixedly at the water. Then suddenly he went silent and ran below deck. They never found him again. The final entry in Captain Holt's log for that day read simply, "The sea is calm, too calm." That evening, as the sun sank into the mist, a faint vibration returned, a deep hum rising from the hull, like the resonance of something enormous moving below. The Eliza seemed to shiver. A cup rolled off a table. The men froze. Then just as suddenly it stopped. Dinner that night was quiet. Anders served the stew as usual, though his hands shook. The captain sat at the head of the table silent. One by one the crew began to eat. The fog outside pressed harder against the windows. The oil lamp flickered once, twice, then steadied. No one spoke again for the rest of the meal, and somewhere in the distance through the heavy air, a single bell rang across the water, once, then again. No ship in sight, no echo. Just the hollow, lonely sound, carried by the calm, indifferent sea.
The next morning dawned pale and gray. The fog had thickened overnight, curling around the Eliza like a living shroud. When the crew awoke, the horizon was gone. There was no line separating sea from sky, only a heavy white void stretching in every direction. The sound of waves was muted, as if the ocean had forgotten how to move. Even the gulls had stopped crying. Captain Holt stood at the bow, peering into the emptiness. His breath came out in visible clouds. The air was unnaturally cold for April. Beside him, Mercer scanned the fog with his spyglass, though it was useless. There was nothing to see. "It feels like the sea's holding its breath," Mercer muttered. Holt didn't answer. He could feel it, too. The silence had weight. By midday, the fog still hadn't lifted. The men grew restless. Anders, the cook, crossed himself before lighting the stove, muttering under his breath. Brigg, the boatswain, began to hum an old sailor's tune, soft and trembling, more to break the quiet than out of cheer. But every sound seemed to die too soon, swallowed by the mist. At 13 hours, the barometer fell again, suddenly and sharply. Holt ordered the sails adjusted, expecting wind, but none came. The Eliza barely moved, drifting without current. That was when they heard it. A faint echo like footsteps on the upper deck, though everyone was below. The sound lasted only a moment, then nothing. Patrick, who had been cleaning near the galley, went pale. "There's someone up there," he whispered. Mercer checked, climbing to the deck with his lantern raised. Empty. The boards were damp, glistening in the fog. But near the starboard rail he found footprints, bare, wet, leading toward the edge of the ship. And stopping there. He stared for a long moment, then knelt. The prints were fresh, small, not from any of his men. When he reported it to Holt, the captain's jaw tightened. "Oh, say nothing to the crew," Holt ordered. "We'll keep watch tonight." As the hours passed, the fog grew thicker still. The men moved slower, their eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. The clock in the galley ticked loudly, the only sound marking time. Dinner was silent again, just the soft scrape of spoons and the faint creak of the hull. Then, without warning, a long groan echoed through the ship, like wood under enormous pressure. The men froze. The sound came from below deck, from the cargo hold. Holt and Mercer grabbed lanterns and descended the narrow stairs. The air below was damp and cold. Their lights flickered as they reached the hold. Nothing was out of place. The barrels, the ropes, the crates, all steady. But a puddle of water had formed near the center, rippling gently as if something beneath was stirring. Mercer leaned closer. "It's seeping through the boards." "Pump it out," Holt said. But as they turned to leave, they both heard it, just faintly, a whisper, low and distant like a voice carried through a long pipe. Neither could make out the words, but it came from the direction of the puddle. They froze. The light dimmed. Then silence returned. Holt's heart pounded as he forced his voice steady. "We'll seal it off. Double the watch tonight." By the time they emerged, the fog had turned yellow-gray in the fading light. The ship's bell gave a soft, hollow chime in the still air. Mercer stayed on deck long after the others went below. He felt something strange, a vibration beneath his feet like the slow beating of a heart. At 22:40, Brig reported movement again. Shapes in the fog, just off the port side. Through the lantern light, they looked like drifting figures, pale and shifting, too tall to be human. They vanished when the light swung toward them. That night, the captain couldn't sleep. He returned to his desk and opened the logbook. His hands shook as he wrote. April 15th, 1903. Fog unbroken for over 18 hours. Pressure unstable. Reports of voices below deck, footprints unexplained. Sea remains unnaturally still. We are adrift, yet not moving. I feel eyes upon us, though none are seen. The crew is frightened. I cannot blame them. He paused, then added, "There is something in the fog." He closed the book and stared at the oil lamp's flame until his vision blurred. Then came the knock, soft, 3 times. He turned slowly. "Who's there?" he called. No answer. He opened the door. The corridor was empty. When he returned to his desk, he found the logbook open again, a single wet fingerprint smudged across the page. By morning, one of the men was missing. Patrick's bunk was empty, his blanket neatly folded. His boots were gone, but not his jacket. They searched the ship from bow to stern. Nothing. Not even footprints this time. Anders swore he'd seen Patrick during the night, standing near the bow, looking into the fog, whispering something. When Anders called out, the boy turned his head slowly, smiled faintly, and said, "I see her." Then the fog swallowed him. No one spoke for hours after that. By noon, another light appeared in the mist, faint and pulsating, just off the starboard side. It moved with them, keeping distance. Mercer watched it for almost an hour. "It's following us," he whispered. Holt signaled with the lantern, 3 long flashes. No response. The light blinked once, twice, then went dark. That evening, Anders refused to cook. He sat in the galley staring at the flame, muttering, "They're not gone. They're right outside." Holt tried to keep order, assigning shifts, doubling the watch, but discipline was unraveling. Near midnight, Brig burst into the captain's cabin, face pale. "Sir, the sea's gone black." Holt rushed to the deck. The fog had parted slightly, revealing the water below. It was dark, not the usual midnight blue, but absolute black, absorbing the lantern light completely. It shimmered faintly in places, as if something vast was moving underneath. Then came a sound, distant, melodic, almost human. A long, mournful hum that rose and fell like a song sung underwater. It lasted for several minutes, echoing from nowhere. The men stood frozen. "What in God's name is that?" Mercer whispered. "Wind," Holt said automatically, though there was no wind. When the sound finally faded, the sea returned to its usual color and the fog began to lift, just slightly, enough to reveal a strange sight, a wooden lifeboat floating empty not far away. "Abandoned vessel," Brig shouted. They lowered a rope and pulled it closer. The boat bore no name, but its paint was chipped and faded, matching Eliza's color exactly. The men exchanged uneasy glances. This is ours," Mercer said quietly. But all our lifeboats are accounted for." They checked again. Every lifeboat still hung in its place, untouched. The one floating beside them was identical, down to the rusted bolts and rope bindings. Holt ordered it pushed away immediately. "It's a trick of the current," he said sharply, though the current was still. By dawn, the fog had thinned to a pale haze. The men were exhausted, jumpy, whispering constantly. Anders hadn't been seen since the previous night. His knife lay on the galley table, blade wet with seawater. Holt's logbook entry that morning was brief, April 16th. 2 men missing. No sign of struggle. Fog thinning, though not entirely gone. Compass unreliable. "I fear a sickness of the mind spreading among the crew, or something worse." The silence grows unbearable. He hesitated, then added, "The ocean no longer feels empty. It feels aware." Later that day, Mercer found something floating near the hull, a bottle sealed with wax. Inside was a scrap of paper, water-stained but legible. Only a few words could be read. "Don't listen to the sea when it calls your name." When he showed it to Holt, the captain turned pale. "Where did you find this?" "Just under the starboard beam. It floated right to us." "Burn it," Holt said. But Mercer hesitated. "It's a warning, sir." "Then it's too late for warnings." That night, the crew gathered on deck. They spoke little, watching the fog drift apart into ghostly tendrils. Somewhere in the distance, faint lights shimmered, too small for ships, too steady for stars. They pulsed like heartbeats. Brigg whispered a prayer. No one laughed. The Eliza moved without wind now, gliding over the glassy surface. The sails were full, but no one felt a breeze. The sea made no sound. Even when the ropes creaked, it seemed muffled, as if wrapped in cloth. The men began to cover their ears, claiming they heard faint voices whispering from the water below. By morning, another man was gone. His name was Doyle, the helmsman. His post was empty, the wheel turning slowly by itself. The ship sailed straight, steady, but no one could say why. The fog finally began to thin by evening, revealing a pale gray sky and a calm, endless sea. But none of them cheered. The silence was still there, thick and absolute. The sound of waves had vanished completely. Even when Holt leaned over the rail and dropped a piece of wood into the water, it made no splash. It simply sank, noiselessly, swallowed by the still surface. He watched until the ripples faded, his throat dry. Mercer approached slowly. "The sea's gone deaf," he said. Holt didn't answer. He could feel it, the weight, the presence, something vast beneath them. That night, the captain wrote his final entry for the day, April 17th, 1903. "The sound of waves has stopped. The sea moves, but without voice. Some force I cannot name has taken hold of us. I pray it passes. If not, God forgive whatever we've awakened." He closed the book. The ship rocked gently in the silent ocean. Somewhere deep below, unseen, something moved, and for a moment, the entire Eliza seemed to sigh.
By the time the sun rose on April 18th, the Eliza no longer felt like a ship. It felt like a coffin drifting through fog. The men spoke in whispers now, not out of fear of being overheard, but because they sensed the silence listening. Every sound, no matter how small, seemed to echo too long, stretching unnaturally across the empty air before dying. Captain Holt hadn't slept in 2 days. His beard was unkempt, his eyes bloodshot, and his voice dry from disuse. The crew avoided his gaze. They all knew he was writing less and staring more. The logbook lay half open on his desk, the ink smudged, the words less like reports and more like confessions. "We are drifting without direction. I no longer trust the compass nor the stars. The sea mirrors the sky so perfectly I cannot tell which way is up. The men whisper of shapes under the hull. I hear them too." By noon, only 10 men remained. Holt gathered them on deck, his voice cracking as he spoke. "We keep the routine. Watch in pairs. No one alone on deck after dark. Do not—" He hesitated, glancing toward the water. "Do not answer if you hear your name." They nodded, though none asked why. They already knew. That afternoon, a sound came from the sea. Not the hum from before, but something like breathing. Slow, vast, patient. The fog pulsed faintly in rhythm with it, swelling and retreating like a living lung. The men stood still, staring over the rails, each of them feeling the same impossible thing, that the ocean was awake. At dusk, Mercer approached the captain quietly. "We're losing them," he said. "They're not sleeping. They're not eating. They hear voices." Holt rubbed his temples. "So do I." He opened the log again, the last few pages damp from salt air. His handwriting was jagged now. The fog speaks. It whispers names, always in the voice of someone we love. It tempts. I nearly went to the rail myself tonight, caught myself at the last moment. If we are to survive, we must not listen. Then below that, a shaky line. Patrick was right. She is here. No one knew who she was. The sea had no name. By the second night, the fog glowed faintly from within, Not with moonlight. There was no moon, but with something deeper, a blue-white shimmer that seemed to come from the water itself. The men huddled together on deck, afraid to go below. Holt paced in silence, glancing over the side again and again as if expecting something to climb aboard, and then they began to disappear. Brigg went first. He was on night watch with Mercer near the aft. Mercer turned to adjust the lantern, and when he looked back, Brigg was gone. No sound, no cry, only his pipe lay on the deck, still warm, smoke curling upward before vanishing into the mist. Mercer shouted, searching, but Holt stopped him. "No calling," he said hoarsely. "No names." They searched until dawn, nothing. When the light came, the fog was thinner, but the air was colder. Anders' stew pot still sat on the stove, untouched. The food had spoiled overnight, though the air had been freezing. The clock in the galley had stopped at 03:17 and refused to tick again. By midday, another man vanished, Johnson, the quiet carpenter. His tools were neatly arranged beside the mast, his boots by the stairs. It was as if he had stepped out of existence. The sea around the Eliza was flat as polished glass. No movement, no sound, not even the faint lap of water against the hull. The men stopped talking entirely. Only Mercer and Holt remained near the helm, their voices reduced to murmurs. "I keep seeing them," Mercer whispered. "Their faces in the water. Every time I blink," Holt didn't look at him. "They're not there." "They are, sir." "And they're smiling." That night, Holt locked himself in his cabin. He could hear the faint tapping again. 3 knocks, soft and patient. He didn't move. The sound came again. He clenched his jaw, breathing shallowly. Then came a voice, low, familiar, the voice of his wife, dead these 5 years. "William," it said. "Come home." His hand trembled toward the door. The lamp flickered. He took a step, then stopped, pressing his palms to his ears until the voice faded. When he opened his eyes, he saw condensation on the inside of his porthole, a single word written in the fog: "Stay." At dawn, he found Mercer standing by the rail, motionless. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing an endless calm sea, silver in the morning light. Mercer didn't turn when Holt called. He only said quietly, "They're beneath us." "I can see them." Holt approached, gripping his shoulder. "There's nothing there." Mercer smiled faintly. "Then why are they waving?" He leaned forward. Holt lunged, grabbing his coat, but his hand closed on air. Mercer was gone. No splash, no ripple. Just the empty space where he had been. Holt sank to his knees. For a long time he stayed there, staring into the quiet. The ocean reflected him perfectly. No distortion, no motion. Only when he blinked did he realize that his reflection wasn't blinking back. He stumbled to his cabin, nearly tearing the logbook from the desk. His writing was frantic now, words smeared and uneven. "I am the last." The sea has taken them, not drowned, taken. They go silent and then they are gone, as if the world forgets them the moment they vanish. The air hums like a voice behind the walls. I cannot tell if we are moving anymore. Time itself feels thin. My hands tremble as I write this. The ship feels hollow yet alive. He paused, staring at his reflection in the small brass mirror above the desk. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw another face behind his own, a pale outline, featureless, watching. The next entry came hours later. The handwriting barely legible. "There is something beneath the hull. I feel it moving. It knows I am alone. It calls to me by name, but I will not answer. I must leave a record. If this log survives, let whoever finds it remember. The sea is not empty. It remembers. It hungers." He dropped the pen. Outside, the fog pulsed again, the same rhythm as before, slow, deliberate, alive. The boards creaked as though footsteps were circling the deck. The lamp went out. Darkness filled the cabin. Then came the silence, not peaceful, not gentle, but total. Even his heartbeat seemed to stop. The ship itself seemed to hold its breath. Holt opened the door and stepped onto the deck. The air was perfectly still. The sails hung limp. The sea stretched endlessly, reflecting the pale, sickly glow of the fog. He looked around. Every rope, every barrel, every tool was in place. But he was utterly alone. He whispered, "If you want me, take me." The water shimmered once. A faint light rose from the depths, a circle of blue radiance spreading beneath the hull. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like watching a star drown. Holt's face softened. He stepped forward slowly until he stood at the rail. The light pulsed once more. He leaned forward and the ship gave a soft sigh. No splash, no trace. The logbook remained open on his desk, the ink still wet. The final line written in a trembling hand. April 19th, 1903. The sea has gone silent. The Eliza drifted on, her sails ghost white in the fog. By the following dawn, she was empty.
The Eliza drifted for 6 days before anyone saw her again. On the morning of April 25th, 1903, a group of Irish fishermen from the small coastal town of Ballycullen spotted what they first took for a patch of fog on the horizon. But as the mist shifted, a dark shape emerged. A ship, silent and unmoving, her sails half-furled, glistening with dew. The men called out, but no answer came. The vessel floated perfectly still, as though anchored to the sea itself. Not a single gull circled her mast. No smoke rose from her galley, only the slow creak of timbers swaying with the tide. When they finally approached, the name on the stern came into view. Eliza, letters blackened with salt and age. She looked intact, undamaged, as if she just left port yesterday. The fishermen circled once, shouting again. No reply. Then one of them, a young deckhand named O'Malley, said softly, "She's listening." They tied a line and boarded. The deck was dry, the ropes neatly coiled. The sails hung limp in the still air. Everything seemed too clean, too arranged, as if waiting for inspection. The wheel turned slightly, groaning, though there was no wind to move it. Below deck, the silence was suffocating. The bunks were made, the dishes stacked, and the dining table was still set for a meal. Plates, cups, even spoons laid out perfectly. In one bowl lay a spoon half buried in cold stew that hadn't spoiled, though nearly a week had passed. The smell was faintly metallic, not rot but something older, like stone after rain. In the captain's cabin they found the logbook. The last entry was dated April 19th. The ink had run where the page was wet, as if touched by a dripping hand. Beneath the final words, "The sea has gone silent," was a single fingerprint, smudged in black salt. No sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood, not even the ship's dog. Every lifeboat hung in place, ropes taut. The only thing missing was life itself. The fishermen searched for hours. They found a lantern still burning faintly in the galley, though its oil had long been spent. They found mirrors fogged from within, as if someone had breathed on them moments before. And they found the ship's clock, its hands frozen at 3:17, the same time noted in the captain's log. When they finally left the Eliza, they towed her slowly toward shore. But by the next morning she was gone. The line had snapped sometime during the night. The fishermen swore they'd seen her lights once, far out at sea, blinking like a dying heartbeat before vanishing into the mist. Weeks later, the story reached the British Admiralty. A formal investigation began. They called it the Eliza incident. The surviving fishermen were interviewed, their statements recorded with skeptical precision. No bodies, no damage. Everything clean. The air was wrong, too heavy. We heard bells, but not from the ship. The official report filed in June 1903 concluded simply, cause undetermined. Crew presumed lost at sea. But not everyone accepted that. In 1907, a Royal Navy diver named Edwin Price claimed to have found fragments of a wooden hull near the edge of the continental shelf, bearing the same paint pattern as the Eliza. He described a deep trench below it, perfectly circular, glowing faintly even at 200 feet down. When he surfaced, he refused to dive again. There was a sound, he told his commander, like breathing. He resigned a week later. The logbook of the Eliza was stored in the Maritime Archive in London. Over the decades, it grew brittle, unreadable in places, but archivists noted something peculiar. Every few years, the pages would dampen, as though exposed to mist, though the vault remained dry. The fingerprint on the final page never faded. In 1932, a historian named Clara Gale published a short article about the mystery, titled, "The Ship That Heard Too Much." She compared the case to the legend of the Mary Celeste, but argued that the Eliza was different, not a tragedy of weather or mutiny, but of perception. Perhaps, she wrote, they vanished because they listened to something that was never meant for human ears. The sea does not forgive curiosity. By 1958, the story had passed into local folklore. Fishermen in Ballycullen still refused to speak her name aloud when fog rolled in. They said that on calm nights, if the water was perfectly still, you could hear soft tapping under your boat. 3 knocks, followed by a whisper calling your name. Those who answered never returned. In 1991, a research vessel scanning the North Atlantic floor recorded an anomaly, a magnetic disturbance forming a perfect circle, roughly 120 meters wide, with faint reflective points around its edge. When the sonar image was enhanced, the operator thought he saw a shape in the center, long, narrow, curved like a hull. The coordinates matched the Eliza's last known position. The data was filed and the expedition moved on. Now, more than a century later, the Eliza remains a ghost in maritime history. No wreck recovered, no human remains identified, no explanation offered. Only the logbook survives, its words still legible in the brittle paper. The sea is calm, too calm. Sometimes visitors to the archive say they can hear faint sounds when they open the case, like distant waves, or perhaps breath against glass. One archivist claimed the fingerprint on the page was warm to the touch. She never returned to work after that night. And on certain mornings, when the Irish coast lies wrapped in mist and the tide stands still, fishermen swear they can see her again, a dark silhouette drifting just beyond the fog line, sails ghost white, wheel unmanned. The sea below her is silent. The air is perfectly still. If you listen carefully, you might hear it, the soft ring of a bell carried across the water. Once, then again. But don't listen too long, because the sea remembers every name it's ever called.